There is definitely a conversation you know you should be having right now, but you've postponed it. You've maybe softened it in your head. You've convinced yourself that now is not the right time. And today, on this episode, we're going to talk about why that decision is quietly eroding trust, performance, and leadership credibility in your organization. I'm joined today by Emma Collyer, and together we're going straight into the belly of the beast. Difficult conversations, why we avoid them, and how to have them without blowing up relationships or yourself, both in the day-to-day and when things are already in turmoil. Leadership today isn't just about scaling. It's about navigating constant uncertainty, market disruptions, and high-pressure decisions. If you're dealing with chaos, bottlenecks, and relentless pressure, welcome to the Business Emergency Room. Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I'm glad you're here today. We are going to talk about the belly of the beast, I call it. We are going to talk about difficult conversations and trust, but very specifically in the context of knowing your people and knowing your team, and how do you know enough and have effective communication with your team and your people so that when the going gets tough and emotions are running high and things maybe are different from the normal, you can tap into the best and engage as effective as you would maybe be able to in a more normal situation. And I have the perfect guest here today to discuss that. Her name is Emma Collyer, and she is the owner and principal coach of Aspire Executive Coaching. She mainly works with, she works with a lot of engineering types. So people like me and many of you I know, but not just those. So she helps leaders and organizations turn everyday interactions into powerful two-way conversations that actually help build and lead to trust, creativity, and results. She has a very down-to-earth approach, and her energy in the room is known to be very effective and good for the tough talk situation in growth moments specifically. So there is much more to Emma, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But all in all, safe to say, perfect candidate for us to talk about internal engagement and talking around some of the stuff that's hard or awkward or difficult to talk about. To start off, Emma, what do you what from where you sit makes people shy away from conversations? What are the things that you see people don't want to talk about but maybe should?
Yeah, I think this is a really tricky one, and I guess the most common theme I see is the the hesitation to give constructive feedback, as we would call it, is the reaction of the other person, because they're concerned about upsetting somebody, or maybe it's been taken the wrong way, and what happens if it impacts the relationship that we have right now, because it's good and I don't want to affect it. So I don't really want to have that difficult conversation because something might happen after that. So instead of digging in, there's an avoidance. And so the thing that needs to be said doesn't get said. And so
Yeah, and it's so amazing, right? Because the first word that comes to mind that when you say that is care. It means that actually, if I hear you say that somebody's coming from a place of care, right? They're like, oh, that's a conversation I don't know if I want to have, because, the other person might not like what they're going to get told, or they might have a reaction that may mean that we no longer get along, or things start to crumble, or they will at least not be the same they were before. I find it so intriguing always, right? That the things we find difficult often come from a good place, right? From a place where we want things to be kind and nice and friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it all the time. The good intention is there and people really want to do a good job as managers and leaders, but there is this kind of holding back of providing that information that is either going to help somebody improve or is going to increase performance for that individual, purely because they're concerned about what happens at the end of this conversation, or I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to frame it. You know, that is often where we get to with these. It's like, I think I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. And that's another challenge that we see all the time. You know, I talk with people. It's like, well, okay, I have to tell them this, but what do I do? How do I do it so it lands in the right way? So there's kind of this process we go through trying to think of the best way of saying something. And then we don't do it because by that point, then the time has passed.
Yeah.
And so
the moment's gone.
The moment's gone. We've maybe left it a week, 2 weeks. It's like, oh, we don't really need to do that now. I should have maybe done it a couple of weeks ago, but now I'll just leave it. It's easier to do that. So we kind of miss the opportunity.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, there's something around timing of having these conversations. Absolutely. And not leaving it. I hear something about framing. I hear something about needing to overcome that initial hurdle to actually go there. Is there also something in the space of when you help people develop this muscle, develop this skill, or actually help figure out how to have certain conversations in the context of a larger issue or something going on in an organization? Is what people or leaders sometimes think they need to say or want to say, and once you work on the framing with them, does that sometimes change to a different message than what they thought they started with?
Yeah, so a few things can happen. So we can be tempted to sugarcoat, you know, make it out. So I'm telling you this, but don't worry because we think you're really great. So we're gonna water it down. And so the key message gets lost completely. And so the person who is receiving that information goes away really confused because they're not really sure what the conversation was about. So that's one thing that can happen. Another thing is we can overload with information. So I've been on the receiving end of this. You know, somebody will provide a list of 10 things that you need to do to improve yourself or improve the work that you're doing. And it's too much. And really, you want to be just focusing on one thing, maybe two at most. You know, what is the one thing that individual needs to be working on or improving on to really get them to the next place? So those are the kind of reframing, having those conversations like, okay, let's not provide a shopping list. Let's just focus on one thing and let's not sugarcoat. Let's be direct in what needs to be said.
Okay, and so this is in the performance space, right? So I'm hearing a really clear message where one side is telling the other side that they need to do things differently or better. Yeah, I'm assuming better. But what in the context of difficult conversations of when your organization is pivoting or changing and there is difficult messaging more across the board, right? So difficult messaging and conversations around, well, our business isn't doing well overall. And so not only do all of us maybe need to perform differently as a business, we also need to make some hard choices. Is group level communication on some of those difficult messages very different from individual conversations? And or is the delivery, let's say, I have to deliver this message to a group of 100 engineers, right? Mm. Do I then need to tailor that into subgroups, or do I talk to all 100 engineers in one go so that they all know that they hear the same message? How do you look at situations like that? What are some of the things to think about if you strategize in that space?
Yeah, I think particularly if you're talking about change in an organization, you're having to deliver a difficult message. Similar things apply, you know, be clear, be direct, be transparent with what you know as far as you can be. I would also say if you're delivering to 100 plus individuals, you know, who are those allies that you can have a conversation with in advance about the message you're about to deliver, because a lot of people afterwards are going to have questions and you might not be there to receive them. So who else is going to be able to share that messaging, take on board some of that questions, those thoughts, those concerns, and either feed them back to you or deal with them themselves. So I think just thinking much more broadly, because you can't do it all.
Great advice. You're not necessarily saying, oh, match one to one, but you need a relevant or practical ratio of ears and eyes in the room. And not have that ratio being too big that it's really going to be and probably be experienced as one-way communication.
Absolutely. If you're in a room of 100 people, there's going to be people who are quiet, aren't going to want to share their thoughts, their concerns. But if you're splitting that down into a group of 10, 12 people, that's very different. And at team level, then they're more likely to put their hand up and say, this is my concern, or this is what I'm worried about, or can you share more about this? In a larger setting, it's very much more listening to information. One or two, of course, will probably speak up, but not everybody. So I think having those opportunities for that smaller conversation and having people that can help you do that, because you can't be everywhere doing everything, is going to be key to delivering that as well.
Yeah, so really taking care in ensuring that you as the communicator or deliverer of the message create the space for it to become two-way communication.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
I often hear, amongst us who get community or a leadership training and communication training, etc., which is part, of a perpetual journey, but then saying, oh, well, just think about it in the context of the way you would want to receive the message. And yes and no, right? For instance, I think in the inconsistency, that's a good way to think about it, right? If I'm telling you this, but I see you do that, I would feel cheated, and it's easy to understand that you're eroding trust in your organization. Can we talk a little bit though about to what extent you feel that leaders should, with their teams and their peers, really appreciate or respect or cater to preferred communication styles of whoever they're engaging with? When is that maybe more important or less important?
Yeah, I think if you're operating in a team, I'm going to say a team of 6 individuals, for example, you have a lot more opportunity to vary your style. So I know some leaders, might be communicating by email with somebody, they might be texting somebody else, they might be on Slack, they might be using WhatsApp. They have a number of different communication channels, and everybody's unique and has their own preferences. So on a team level, you can adapt that to a certain degree. I think once it becomes much bigger, then it's much more difficult. And so you're looking for those different avenues. Are you standing up and talking in front of a room to communicate the message? Are you sharing memos or information via email across an organization? What does that look like? But having that consistent channel of communication that's expected and that you're communicating frequently is really important. I think the other thing I would add as well, absolutely, we don't always want to be saying the same thing, but I think the thing you can be consistent on is your tone and your body language. If you're keeping very calm, open body language, maintaining eye contact with people, that goes a long way to building trust. I think particularly when there is a difficult message to be delivered, I think people really appreciate that. I think if you're going in sort of very high-pitched or, there's a lot of emotion behind that, the way the message received then is very different. If you're doing it in a very calm way, it lands a lot better.
All right. So what happens then if a message gets delivered with a lot of emotion? Because somebody could also say, well, I want to show these people that I'm also affected by the message. But what you're suggesting kind of, or what I hear you say kind of suggests, like, if you're in a situation that also affects you, and if you are responsible for communicating this to large parts of an organization,
Yep.
that you maybe should make sure that you yourself bring yourself to a place where you can calmly talk about it, because otherwise you might be too busy with what's going on in your head rather than busy communicating to others. Is that where that comes from, or is there more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think ensuring your own emotions are in check. Yes, you might be affected by whatever's been proposed, and it's a difficult thing to hold, but as managers and leaders, that's part of the role. So giving yourself a few minutes before you have to go and do that, just to compose yourself in order that you can do that effectively, so people understand what's being said. You can acknowledge that it's a difficult message, and you can acknowledge, hey, I am finding this difficult. It's a difficult message to deliver and hear. That's can be part of the message that you're putting across, but I would always encourage to kind of keep your emotions in check when you're doing it.
Yeah, because if you have to lead through it and maintain that trust, if you put yourself too far in maybe their shoes, then are you still the leader to lead them through or out the situation, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense. The in the work that you do, what are some of the main differences? I think many of us operate in a space where we're perpetually busy, right? Stress seems to be the norm. And so at any point in time, I think we experience peers or colleagues who have too much on our plate. But when the rest of the organization is somewhat business as usual, I think we stand a chance at recognizing it and managing it around it a bit when the pot starts boiling for everybody a bit, and the whole place is kind of a hot water situation. And we're first of all busier with ourselves and everything that's happening to us, but there's also more people who might not be in an okay space, and the new normal is where everybody is. Where in those situations is not normal and not healthy, but everybody is or everybody, but there's a majority of people who are not themselves and not okay, and there's too much of whatever. What are the main things to keep that would be different in your communication or having difficult conversations when you are in kind of a hot water situation, or when you're having those conversations more as part of business as usual? Would you go about it different ways, different things to think about? Does it change? Are you prepared for these?
Yeah, I think in those kinds of situations, I would be ensuring there's plenty of opportunity for kind of check-in meetings with individuals one-on-one and as a team. I think acknowledging where things are. Sometimes, hey, things are difficult. Life isn't perfect. Business isn't perfect. Sometimes just acknowledging that and saying, I know this is a difficult time for people. We've got a lot of pressure. These are the things we're focused on right now. I think just even saying that can help people feel that they're part of it and that it's not just them. And I think just recognizing that. Of course, there are things, if people are really struggling, a lot of organisations provide support through other means, through third parties, to help with dealing with some of that as well. But I think just providing that space to have a conversation with people and just sort of say, hey, how are you? Or, how are you feeling about the changes or the proposals that have been put forward? What challenges are you seeing? And just opening that door to the conversation goes a long way for a lot of people to feel better about how things are.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is transparency or acknowledging, but also potentially a higher frequency because things are evolving and changing. And so more, in business ER speak, more frequently a finger on the pulse to see where things are at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a tendency when things get busy to drop those kind of conversations. And I think that's the worst thing you can do, because that's when people need more communication, more information to feel like they're part of that journey as well. So I think ensuring you create that space to do it is going to help longer term. it might feel difficult in the moment to create that space with all the other pressures. But I think if you don't do that, you're going to see other things happen. Might be impacting retention or all those other factors that come up when people, are not quite where they need to be. So I think, I would always encourage that even when it's a tough situation.
Yeah. So circling it back to where we started, I think most of us deep down somewhere below, know that we should have the conversations and know the value about, or the value erosion that we're affecting by not having the conversations, right? And so assuming that if we tell ourselves that and remind ourselves, maybe put a sticky note on our desk to say, actually have the difficult conversations today, and can kind of push ourselves over that boundary by getting better at the how, which is what you do with clients. Yep. If I would be sitting behind my desk today and there's a difficult conversation I need to have in the next 7 days, right? Or soon.
Yes.
Can you give us some rules of thumbs or how to frame that on the back of an envelope for myself? What are the things I should think about or think through before entering that conversation?
Yeah, I think covered a few of them already. So think about your timing. So if you've noticed something today, try and deal with it either that day or the next day. Don't leave a long space of time. Think about where you're going to deliver that message. Ideally you want to do that privately if it's a one-on-one conversation so other people can't hear it. Think about your key message. What is the one thing that you want to get across to that person? Think about your tone and your body language, keeping it open, pretty neutral and calm when you're delivering that. And then I would say, think about an action. Often we forget the kind of, what is it at the end of this conversation you want to happen? What's the plan? Are you coming back to this person in a week's time to review the situation, to review progress? What is that that's coming out of it? And then something you can do if you're really struggling to think about how to frame the conversation, because I know I've experienced this in the past, you can use kind of a feedback framework. And there's a few of them out there. There's a framework called SBI, which is the kind of situation, the behavior, and the impact. You kind of frame how you want to share that feedback to somebody. Another one that I know a few people really like is, I think it's a Stanford model, which is I like, I wish, what if? And just by using those and kind of almost planning out and writing down what you want to say and practicing it, when you do go to deliver that, it's going to feel a lot more comfortable. For myself, I remember having a really difficult conversation I had to have with somebody. I practiced saying it to myself like 15, 20 times. So by the time I actually delivered that, the stress on me of actually doing it had disappeared a little bit. And so I was able to do that in a much more clear and calm way. So those are some things I would think about.
Yeah, and I think also the thing that we learn maybe more from sales conversations or other conversations, I think we need to also learn to get comfortable with silence and pauses, right? And not if then the other side is kind of looking at you and not immediately saying something, adding more to it and diluting again the whole clarity of the message in what we're putting out there, right? And so maybe also reminding yourself in the moment that if you don't immediately get a reaction or somebody needs a moment to get their vocabulary together, that we're not filling up that space with more and doing all that good framing that we did, no?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Some people will take longer to digest what you've shared with them. Some might take it away straight away, but you might need to give that person space to go away and think about it and then come back and have another conversation. So I think So
that action, so can we talk a little bit about that? Because I think that to me is the crux of these conversations, right? If you manage to have the conversation, but there is no result of any kind,
yes,
then there's just damage to the relationship, right? Which is exactly the thing we fear.
Yes.
So if there's nothing that came out of it, to what extent does the action need to be something that the recipient of the bad news needs to come up with? or is that very variable? Could it just simply be an acceptance of the proposed action because that's the only way forward? Or, because then the difficult conversation almost more a tell, which I assume also sometimes happens. So can you talk a little bit more about the variation of the forms an action, a good action could have?
Yeah, I think to your point, there's lots of different ways it could go. So if it's a behavior and you're saying, hey, almost don't do this again, it's like the action is, please, next time you do this, and don't do that. So then it is more of an informing on how you would like things to happen next time. But there might be an opportunity to say, let's work on a solution together. So what should, for next time, how do we want to address this situation? And so that is then bringing that person into that solution, and they're coming into a collaborative conversation. And so that's more likely for them to go away with something they can action tangibly, and it delivers well.
Yeah. And so my business is called the Chaos Games because I believe business and work is to an extent a game, right? Operations and organizations, they work by a certain set of rules. So the way I sometimes think of it, what you're saying is there is expectations, right? Just like there's maybe dress codes at school, or at some point it's like, hey, can I remind you, it's a difficult conversation because I know, there might be all sorts of context out there, but ultimately this is the rule of our game, and you also signed up for that. And so in those situations, it's not helpful to make it any bigger than it is, because what you're really saying is, I need compliance here. And then there is spaces where it's like, hey, this is a journey, and we need you to either move faster on this journey, or we need a pivot, or our organization needs something different. And the challenge is, we're not sure if that fits, so we want to give you the chance. How do you think we could try and make this work together? And how do we tee that conversation up, right? That it's I think it helps sometimes to create clarity for ourselves, saying, hey, actually, is this an ask, or actually am I kind of telling them? And if I'm telling them, don't make it sound like an ask, because then I guess we go back to your point of confusion, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Going away, not knowing really, what am I doing with this? Do I need to do something with this? Or do I just go away thinking, well, that was a strange conversation? So yeah, being clear.
So I think this is a skill all of us need to practice, and I think practice is something that makes us better at it, and that is something that you do. But before we get to you and what you do, are there some examples out there of people that have really inspired you, or that you think have a really good style? Think that people we can look at, or scenes in movies, or where you're like, hey, that's a great example of what not to do or what to do?
Oh my goodness. I'm sure there's plenty of what not to do out there in terms of, you think of those really direct kind of telling situations, and the other person's kind of shrinking away from it. And I think that sometimes is why we run away a little bit from feedback, because we're kind of fearful of being the recipient of that kind of feedback ourselves. So we don't want to be on that kind of telling, you must do this and this is what you should be doing kind of conversation. I think I'm just reflecting on who's inspired me. I think just over the years, I've worked with some great leaders and managers who've done a fantastic job in either providing me with feedback in a very empathetic way, but clear way. To your point around, this is the expectation and this is what, I need you to do, and it's not quite here, or it's more clear of this is what needs to happen next time. And so just learning from their skills, and then trying things out myself and making mistakes. You have to try these things out. And timing, I remember getting timing really badly wrong, waiting too long to provide somebody with feedback. And then they fed back to me that, hey, it would have been really helpful to hear about this like last month. Like, okay, no, Sid, I need to do a better job in that. So I think a lot of this is practicing and finding out, the best way of doing it for yourself as well.
of a leading question, but I was hoping you would say that, because we talk about that often enough here on this podcast, that you can learn from other people's experience. You can also learn from your own experience, and it's an iteration, right? So going back to the situations where it worked, and if I think about difficult conversations, I've had some great line managers or leaders who had difficult conversations with me. And with the exact same person, I've also had some really dysfunctional, difficult conversations, right? So it also doesn't mean that somebody who gets it right all the time. But if after listening here today, people are like, hey, this is a skill I want to develop, I should develop, I want to know more about Emma, where do they go? What do they do?
Yeah, so I've got a little handout around this. So Need More Trust is the kind of website link, and there's a download you can get with more information about having those conversations. And my website also has some resources on there. So that's aspireexecutivecoaching.com. And so you can contact me directly through that as well. If you want anything specific, I'm always there to help.
Perfect. So the freebie is at needmoretrust.com.
It is. Yes. Need More Trust.
Perfect. We will also make sure that all these links are available in the show notes. So if wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can go back, find the show notes, and all the links will be there. Emma Collyer is Collyer. And Emma is like how most of the world spells Emma, right? So
2 M's, yes.
Yeah. Well, Emma, this was not a difficult conversation at all. Thank you for being on the podcast and sharing with us. And I think some very practical things we sometimes know, but a good reminder and a challenge to you all. Have that difficult conversation you were supposed to have. Let's use what Emma told us today and have it as soon as possible in a reasonable time frame, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, and with a clear outcome in mind. So thank you for that. And thank you, listener, for tuning in. Hope to have you back here next week. That's it for this episode of the Business Emergency Room. If you are currently dealing with chaos or disruption in your business, please reach out. You can email, text, or call, and I will find a way to connect with you within 24 hours. I've helped others steer out of the storm, and I know I can help you too. Talk soon. Please like, subscribe, and share.